All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Brown. I'm with the Law Office of Eric Brown and Nutmeg Independent Labor Unions, and I want to welcome you tonight to our short webinar program on the Essential Workers Protection Program. So just this past month in January of this year, the Connecticut Comptroller's Office announced a program to help cover some of the losses that some of Connecticut's essential workers suffered as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a good sum of money out there, $34 million. It's available on a first come, first served basis. And so we wanted to speak to you, our members, about how you can access this money if you did have eligible losses that happened during the first about 15 months of the COVID pandemic. One of the points that I'm going to emphasize tonight is that these benefits are payable only for COVID-related losses that occurred between March of 2020, when the pandemic started, and July of 2021, when the program was put into effect by the legislature. So there hasn't been a new fund put in place for any losses that have occurred after July of 2021, although we expect that something will be put in place at some point. And the program's been in place now for about 3 weeks. We don't have any preliminary figures on how much money has been distributed from the fund yet, but it is on a first come, first serve. So we're going to encourage you, if you do feel like you have a claim, to get that claim in as soon as possible. And we'll go through the program and how to do that tonight. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. So this webinar is being put on by law firm of Eric Brown and Nutmeg Labor Unions. If you need to be in touch with any of us over here about this program or any other labor-related or employment-related matters, you can email me at eric@thelaborlawyer.com or my associate Jay Pugliese at rjp@thelaborlawyer.com. Our phone number is 888-579-4222. And we're always happy to talk to you about any legal issues that come up in the labor and employment arena. So let's talk about this Connecticut Essential Worker COVID-19 Assistance Fund, and that's the name of the fund. As I said, it was created by the General Assembly to provide $34 million in assistance to support critical workers who kept the state open during the pandemic. If you're here either live at this webinar or viewing it at some point later on recording, you're probably one of those critical workers who's going to be entitled to benefits if you've suffered losses. And finally, we're pleased because this is more than hearts on a lawn signs, as we saw over the first couple of years in this pandemic. Finally, there's real money that's going to workers who performed in the midst of the pandemic at risk to themselves and to their families. So the first question that we want to answer is whether or not you or someone you know will be eligible for the benefits out of the fund. And as I said at the beginning of this, you have to meet the criteria, and there's 3 eligibility criteria and 3 forms of loss that are going to be covered. And you have to have met the criteria between March 10th of 2020 and July 20th of 2021. Why they decided to end the program as of July 20th, 2021, I don't know. But as I said, it's anticipated that there will be more funding available down the road. So the first thing is you have to be a resident of Connecticut. And the way you establish residency is simply by identifying where you lay your head down at night, where you're domiciled, essentially. So if you get bills sent to a residence, if your driver's license shows that you live there, if you have a tax return that identifies a particular place, that'll show that you're a resident of Connecticut. The program applies to residents of Connecticut who may work in other states in some instances. So if you live in Connecticut but work in Massachusetts or New York or Rhode Island, which are typically the places where Connecticut residents might work, you still may be eligible as long as you live here in Connecticut. Secondly, you have to be employed as an essential worker. And that's a defined term that we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's going to be the types of folks that you would expect who would be at this webinar, who Nutmeg represents, people like police officers, workers in the education field, and public workers snowplow drivers, truck drivers, electrical linemen, things of that nature. All the folks who kept our worlds going while everything else was shutting down. And third, you would have had to contract COVID during this time period, March 10th, 2020 through July 20th, 2021. And the way you prove that, obviously, is through medical records that you may have, or test results that you may have, or if you actually called in sick to work and you have evidence that you were out sick. Those are the various ways that you can prove that you actually did have COVID. Probably the best way is if you got treated with either an urgent care center or hospital, or by your doctor, or you received a prescription for some sort of medication to treat the symptoms at that time. Those are going to be good ways that you can prove that you had COVID during that time period. So if you are eligible by virtue of your status, the top three items that we have listed here, then the next questions are going to be whether or not you suffered any losses that would be covered. And so there's three types of losses that the program covers. The first is lost wages due to your inability to work after a COVID diagnosis or related illness. Now, the great part is that if you did suffer loss because you didn't have sick time available or you ran out of sick time, you're going to be able to seek payment for that lost time. Now, most of our folks who are part of our Nutmeg Union already have sick time available to them. One of the issues, and it's not directly covered by this language, is if you were forced to quarantine because you either came in contact with somebody or somebody at work had a COVID diagnosis that required you to quarantine because you were in contact with that person. The question is whether or not that lost time would be covered. Now, a lot of that lost time would have been covered under the federal CARES Act that was passed back in 2020 for this time period. Although the CARES Act ran out at the end of December of 2020. So there's going to be a time period between January of 2021 and July of 2021 under this program where you might otherwise be covered. The language in the program doesn't say directly that you can get benefits as a result of a quarantine related to COVID, but I would still suggest that you go ahead and apply, document why you're seeking the benefits, and see if there's going to be something available. You may get turned down because the language doesn't say directly, but there's no harm in filing the claim. And just as long as you're truthful, don't say that you had COVID if you didn't. Say, you know, if you're looking for benefits, that you were forced to quarantine because of exposure to COVID, and there might be a benefit payable, even though the language doesn't say that directly. The second way that you can get benefits is if you had out-of-pocket medical expenses, and those are typically going to be things like purchases of prescription medication, doctor visits, ER visits, hospital visits, urgent care visits that might have been subject to a deductible or a copay under your medical insurance program. So a lot of our folks have deductibles now with an HSA program that require an initial spend of $2,000 or $2,500 before benefits kick in. If you had that type of expense, out-of-pocket loss, you can get reimbursed for that. So that would be another basis for filing a claim for these benefits. And finally, unfortunately, if you had a family member who fit these provisions of being a resident of Connecticut, employed as an essential worker, contracted COVID, and ultimately passed away as a result of COVID or a COVID-related illness, you can obtain benefits on their behalf for burial costs associated with the loss of their life. And so that's, even though you may not have contracted COVID, if your loved one contracted COVID and died as a result, you may be eligible for some burial benefits. And that's certainly something that's not available through a typical union contract. So that would be something that you would want to seek benefits for if it's available. So the big question here is, what is an essential worker? As I said, most of the folks who are members of Nutmeg's unions are considered essential workers. We have police officers, administrators, secretaries, paraprofessionals, truck drivers, etc. Those types of folks are all going to be considered essential. The program defines an essential worker as a Connecticut resident employed in an essential job role in Connecticut or surrounding states that had to report to work on site during the pandemic and was not given the option to work remotely. That's most of the folks that we represent. There may be some people in clerical roles who for a period of time didn't have to report to work or were allowed to work remotely, but ultimately everybody at some point was required to return to work, and remote work no longer was an option. So these are all the folks who would be eligible for this benefit. And as I say, if you're not sure whether or not you're eligible, then I always say submit an application and just tell the truth on the application. As long as you're truthful about what happened to you and why you're applying, you can let the benefit administrators decide whether or not you're going to be eligible for the benefit. If you don't know an answer to a question that they may ask, then just say you don't know. That's okay. Don't guess at an answer or write something down that you're not sure about. Because if you're not sure and it turns out that what you said was false, they may try to hold you accountable for that. So if you don't know, say you don't know. But otherwise, give the best information that you can, and you may be eligible for a benefit. There are some websites out there that will help you determine whether or not you fall into the category of essential worker eligible for a benefit under this program. And I have the website here, which you can write down. You know what I'm going to do? I'll try to put this into the chat right now. I'll take care of that later. So anyway, the website is www.cdc.gov/vaccines/COVID-19-categories essential-workers HTML. And there's basically three categories. There's essential healthcare workers, which I don't think we have anybody in Nutmeg, but you may know somebody. So it's anybody who's paid or unpaid serving in a healthcare setting who has the potential for direct or indirect exposure to patients or infectious materials. This includes persons not directly involved in patient care, but potentially exposed to infectious agents while working in a healthcare setting. So that could include all kinds of personnel who had possible direct or indirect exposure to patients or infectious materials during the relevant time frame, which was March of 2020 to July of 2021. And then there's going to be most of the folks that we represent who are the essential non-healthcare workers. And those are the workers who were deemed essential to maintain critical infrastructure and continue critical services and functions. So police that we have, firefighters that we have, anybody who worked in a school setting. But it's also going to include, if you're talking about friends or family, people who worked in grocery stores, people who worked as dock workers, unloading goods and delivering goods, truck drivers, all those folks who may have had exposure could be eligible for a benefit here. So we talk about frontline essential workers, which are the workers likely at highest risk for work-related exposure to COVID. Those would be people like police officers who are going in and out of homes, ambulance drivers, firefighters, people like that who were constantly surrounded by and at risk for exposure to COVID-19. And then there's a second set, not the frontline workers, but the second set of essential workers, folks like school employees, who at least at the beginning may have been working from home, but as this pandemic progressed, were put back into locations where there was occasional or regular exposure to COVID-infected people. So for our purposes, the following industries are included as 1B essential workers. And those are first responders, as I said, community or government-based operations and essential functions. So people who work in town hall, for example, we have folks who work in tax assessors' offices, town clerk's offices, various municipal offices where government functions take place. All those people who work at those places would be considered essential workers. Then we have the folks who work in elementary and secondary schools, and not just certified employees, but any employee, custodians, security guards, paraprofessionals, anybody like that. They would be considered essential workers. You have your educational support services, administrators, and transportation employees. So we have here a picture of a coach. Of course, a coach is somebody who works in elementary or secondary schools or in support services, and so they would be eligible. So we talked about the benefits that are available, and they're lost wages, out-of-pocket medical expenses, and burial expenses. First, lost wages, how do they define that? So it's unpaid leave, wages or salary lost by an affected person who was unable to work as a result of contracting COVID-19 or due to symptoms that were later diagnosed as COVID-19. It doesn't include paid leave. So if you had paid leave, you can't seek a reimbursement of sick bank that you used while you were on COVID. For example, if you used 5 days of sick time, you can't go to this program now and say, I lost 5 days of sick time. I want those 5 days of pay so I can reimburse my bank and build those days back up. That's not something that's available under this program. If you have a workers' comp claim pending, but it hasn't been accepted yet, you can still apply for the benefit and be eligible. The eligible unpaid leave starts after paid time off, paid sick time, or voluntary short-term disability is exhausted. So again, this isn't to supplement or to allow for double dipping. It's for those folks who didn't receive any type of benefit as a result of their illness at the time that it occurred. People who went unpaid, essentially, for missing work due to COVID. The second type of benefit that we talked about are the out-of-pocket medical expenses. So these are costs for medical services related to contracting COVID, like anything, whether you had to go for a test, if you had to go for repeated tests, any type of treatment that you received, diagnosis, anything related to that. If you had out of pocket, and that's typically going to be either your copay or your deductible, you're going to be able to get payment for that. That payment's going to go directly to you, not to your healthcare provider. So if you have bills outstanding to your healthcare providers, once you get whatever monies you receive from this program, you can then go ahead and square up with the provider. That's going to come to you though. And finally, as we talked about, you can get reimbursed for burial expenses up to $3,000 for someone who died from COVID-19, as long as they were an eligible worker. And if you're a relative or family representative, you can apply for the benefit on behalf of the deceased worker. And again, these payments are going to be made directly to you and not to the funeral home or the cemetery or anybody else who provided services. They go to you, and then you have to square up with whoever provided the services. So applying for the benefits is a fairly easy proposition. I know some folks get somewhat intimidated by using the computer, but it's something we all do all the time, every day. So you're going to go to this website, www.ctessentialworkerrelief.org. This is what the homepage looks like when you get there. You can click on this little tab right here that says check eligibility now, and it will take you through a process allowing you to apply for benefits. If you are having difficulty or have questions, there's a help button available to assist you in finding answers to your questions so that you can go through the application process fairly easily. So finally, there's a number of resources that are available out there. A couple of them are at the Connecticut Essentialworkerrelief.org website. One talks about benefits. One section talks about whether or not you're eligible to apply. And there's the cdc.gov website, which has the categories for essential workers. If you're wondering whether you or somebody you know is eligible, you can go to that website and it will give you some information about who and who may not be eligible. It's a new program, so we don't have all the answers yet as to how some of this stuff is going to be applied. There will probably be questions that rise up here and there every now and again. If something happens through your application process and you feel like you have a question that needs answering, we're happy to help. You can reach out to me, Eric at thelaborlawyer.com, or J. Pugliese at RJP at thelaborlawyer.com. You can go to one of our websites, or you can call us at 888-579-4222, and we're happy to help. It's a great program that's out there that's available for the essential workers who help to keep everything going in the midst of the pandemic and continue to do so. These are folks who are the backbone of our union and the backbones of our communities. And we're happy to see that they can get some reimbursement for what they've gone through and some of the hardship they endured during the pandemic, the early days. And so money's available. It's first come, first serve, as I said. So if you think you might be eligible, go to that website. As I said, www.ctessentialworkerrelief.org. Get your application in and get the money that you're entitled to. And we'd love to hear success stories from you if you are able to get those benefits and share those with our people online. And in the meantime, I just want to thank you on behalf of Nutmeg and our law firm for all the work you've been doing throughout the pandemic. We know it's not easy. We're always happy to help you in any way that we can get the benefits that you're entitled to and that you deserve. Thanks for popping in tonight and listening, and have a good night. Thanks, everybody.